Wow, 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 wow. Wow, look at this. Unbelievable. When did all you people sneak in? This is amazing. My wife won't believe this. This is so many people. I want to get a count, if you don't mind. If you're here tonight, would you just mind raising your hand so I can get a quick, ballpark? So a lot of you are here. That's great. A lot of you decided to show up. I feel very, very at home in Texas. I'm from New York City, but I feel very at home in Texas. In Austin, I don't know. I don't know what I think yet. I mentioned I live in New York City. I was born in New York City. I live there. That's where my wife is. So, and where our daughter is. But I've lived there for a long time. But I've been invited to speak in Texas more than any other place, and I feel more at home here than I do in my own stinking apartment. It's a shame. It's a shame. It's a horrible thing. No, I really do mean that. I do mean that. And it's kind of funny because literally about once a year, I'm introducing myself to somebody, Eric Metaxas, and they always say, "Oh, what part of Texas?" And I say, no, my name is Eric Metaxas. It's Greek. I have to explain. I live in New York City. Just in case you're wondering about New York City, if you watch the news, which I don't recommend, they would have you think that, New York is in flames or something. New York is essentially the same as it's always been. It's fine. It's fine. If you can live in Austin, you can live in New York. Trust me. It's like absolutely fine. It's wonderful. And I'm really proud to say that for 12 years, my wife, Suzanne, who I'm sorry she couldn't be with us tonight, she ran the Crisis Pregnancy Center in Manhattan. Yeah. So I know what this work is about a little bit. I've heard all the stories. I'm familiar. And mostly what I'm familiar with, and this is sort of who I am in a sense. I do a lot of radio. I have a TV program, and I feel that it's important. Part of the battle that we're in, because I want to talk about that tonight, it's the battle in the media, right? In other words, imagine if the media in America weren't sold out to the secular, demonic, Marxist left, and imagine if they actually reported what we know is true. If they only reported what's true, right? And what's true that you never ever hear, which I heard my wife say many times, that if a woman is facing an unplanned pregnancy, if one person will come alongside her and encourage her to have that kid and walk with her, she will have that kid in the overwhelming number of cases. You never hear about that. You never hear that often it is the boyfriend who is pushing her to get the abortion. You don't hear that stuff. And so a big part of the battle we face in this country, particularly on this issue, is getting the truth out, because there's so many lies, and the media is simply not helping. But you knew that already. I want to talk. A couple of people came up to me here. I have to say this because I find it sort of funny. Came up to me and said, "Thanks for coming. I've never heard of you before." Obviously not saved people. And that's fine. That's fine. No, but it is it is kind of funny to me because I don't expect people to have heard of me. But thank you for coming, even though you didn't know what you were getting. But I always think when I'm being introduced or something, I'm very eclectic. I've done a million different things, so I'm hard to sum up. You can't say Eric has written 45 novels or whatever. I've done everything 2 or 3 times. So I've done a million different things. But the one thing that I say to impress people is not, I went to Yale University, which is, a very spiritually dark place, which I don't recommend. And I'm not just saying that because there's Aggie fans here. I mean that. I actually mean that. Oh, there are. Oh, interesting. But what I say to impress people in terms of my biography, and it's not written in the program, is that I was a writer for VeggieTales. Oh, see? Yeah. You'll notice. Oh, now you're listening. Aren't you ashamed that it took that? You should be ashamed. I not only did I write, I only wrote a little bit for VeggieTales, but I wrote the Hamlet Omelet parody of the Lyle the Kindly Viking video. Wow. And and I'm the voice of the narrator on the Esther video. Oh, now you're impressed. Man, that makes me sick. Yeah, I'm the voice of the narrator in the Esther video, and it's really, I did such a good job as the narrator that if you watch it today, I'm still the narrator 20 years later. It's unbelievable. Yeah, they kept me in. But anyway, I'm very eclectic. I've done a lot of things. I do a thing in New York City called Socrates in the City. Actually, we've done it in Fort Worth. I've done it around the country. So I'm a little bit all over the place. If you look me up, I just go to my website, ericmetaxas.com. If you can spell Eric Metaxas, I know it's not easy, but it's not spelled like Texas, okay? Let me be clear. It's Eric Metaxas. But I've done all kinds of different things, and I have, by now, I guess I've written, 15 books. I've written like 30 children's books, but I've written 15 books. My newest book is, I think, my 15th book. But the reason I say this is because I've always written my books for everybody, right? Even the books about Christian heroes like Bonhoeffer or William Wilberforce, I always write my books to reach everybody. But the last two books I wrote, this is the first time this ever happened, I wrote them specifically for people who call themselves Christians. So some of you are familiar with the book, I'll speak about it tonight, Letter to the American Church. And you could think, and you could wonder, how could somebody be so arrogant as to write a book letter to the American church? Well, I wasn't going to title it that. I was going to title it because what it's really about is the issue summed up in the phrase, faith without works is dead. That to me is the fundamental heresy at work in the American church. And I was going to title it that, but that book, Letter to the American Church, is the first time I ever felt, I genuinely trust that the Lord has guided me in my career and that every book that I've written, He's been with me. In some cases, that's been very, very clear. The Bonhoeffer book was, and I want to talk about that tonight, but this book, Letter to the American Church, I have never, ever felt a prophetic pressure from God that you must say this. I've never felt that before, and I don't say that lightly, believe me. I don't say like I sort of. It was a very, very dramatic thing that I have to write about this, and it wasn't me, it was the Lord. Now, some of you here have a personal relationship with Jesus, and you know, yeah, He can speak to us, and He speaks to each of us differently. He doesn't speak to each of us in the same way, but I have never felt that before, this undeniable sense that the Lord is calling me to write what is in this book. So it's not my letter to the American church. God forbid. It's what I have to say. It's what I believe the Lord wanted me to say. But when the Lord, is asking you to do something, in some sense, it frees you up because it's not about you, right? It's about, I just need to say what I think the Lord wants me to say. So I've never written a book to the American church before. Some of you know it was turned into a documentary film, which you can show at your church for free. Because I think the message is important, and I want to talk about that message tonight. The message ultimately, the whole thing started when I wrote my Bonhoeffer book. That book came out in 2010. Some of you will be familiar with that, some of you won't be familiar, but I'll say in a nutshell, actually, I will say this. The Bonhoeffer book, which came out in 2010, for years I hoped somebody would make a film of the story of Bonhoeffer. And that is coming out November 22nd. I beg you to mark your calendars. It's not like officially based on my book, but it is a magnificent film of the life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And I beg you to go see it the opening weekend, because when something comes out, in the crazy world in which we live, when something comes out that is really good, we need to support it. And that goes for everything. We need to make an effort. And I think that oftentimes we don't, we sit back. But the story of Bonhoeffer, in a nutshell, is, if somebody says, what's it about? Well, I say, it's about a pastor who got involved in the plot to kill Hitler, right? But it's ultimately not about that. What is it really about? It's about a pastor, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who tried to wake up the church in his day, to stand and be the church. And like all prophetic voices, or like most prophetic voices, when you look at the Old Testament, you see that usually they fail, that God calls them to say stuff to the people of God, to get the people of God to actually be the people of God. And in the case of Bonhoeffer, that's what it was, is that he was trying to wake up the German church to the rising evil, to the satanic evil of the Nazis. And most of the church said what I think much of the American church is saying today is, you know what, we're not interested. We're going to take a pass. We don't do, that sounds political. We just want to do church. We just want to preach the gospel. The nightmare of the story, of course, is that because the German church did not wake up in time, and trust me, it's not like all the German pastors who did nothing were evil or pro-Hitler. If they had been, you could understand why they would do nothing, or why they would, by doing nothing, aid and abet evil. No, many of them were good men, but they got the theology wrong. They got the thinking wrong. They thought, this is not my lane. I'm gonna stay in my lane, my theological lane. I'm just gonna preach the gospel. Jesus does not call us to just preach the gospel. I want to be real clear. That's a heresy. That's a lie. And every heresy and every lie, in case you're scoring, is from the pit of hell. It's not like, oh, that's B- Christianity. No, that's the devil's Christianity. It is wicked. And so Bonhoeffer tried very desperately to wake up the German church. He could see where the evil was going. And of course, you have a real range of views in Germany at the time. I always like to quote the statistic. There were 18,000 Lutheran pastors. If you're Catholic, I'm leaving you out of this. But it's across, okay? But I just know there were 18,000 Lutheran pastors in Germany in the early 30s. 3,000 of them signed the Barmen Declaration and stood very, very strong, you know, for a few years, stood very, very strong. 3,000 of the 18,000 were basically pro-Hitler. So like if you think of the most woke, preposterous church in America today, you know, hanging out every kind of flag and standing for everything but the scripture and but the truth that the church has been teaching for 2,000 years. Those churches exist, but you put them in a category over here. You can't blame them. They're just nuts. But if you have 3,000 heroes standing for the truth of God, being willing to suffer, be willing to send to concentration camp, be willing to be whatever it is, and then you have 3,000 maniacs, in the middle, if you do the math, you have 12,000 pastors in Germany who effectively said, we're not going to choose. We're going to be neutral. We're going to sit on the fence. We're going to have a religious carve-out. They seem to think that they had a religious carve-out. They didn't want to do politics. And it's because of the 12,000, many of whom agreed with Bonhoeffer or agreed with what's right and what's wrong, but they somehow thought being silent in the face of evil was an option. Or maybe they thought it was the right thing. They said, oh, Romans 13, it's very, very clear from the scripture. Whatever this, you know, the government says, we're supposed to go along with that. Are you familiar with some churches that had that attitude in recent years? Whatever the government says, it's a good witness just to go along with it. You know, the government says to bow down to an image of Nebuchadnezzar. Just go along with it. It'll draw people to Jesus. That was sarcasm, by the way. I don't know if you, yeah. Would it help if I mentioned that there's a Nebuchadnezzar VeggieTales episode? Would that help? Would that draw you into the story a little bit? If the government tells you to bow to an idol, to, you know, give a pinch of incense to an image of Caesar. That was my stomach. Wow. The chicken was a little overdone. We all would know that if somebody tells you to go along with the government, you say, no, I can't. I'm a Christian. But there have been many people in history, in Germany in the 30s and in America today, who they didn't get that memo. They seem to think that whatever the government says, I'm going to go along with that. Now, of course, God has instituted governments among men for good purposes, but that doesn't mean that governments always do the right thing. Bonhoeffer called the church the conscience of the state. When you see the government doing evil, it is your duty as a Christian. This is not extra credit Christianity. It is your duty before God to speak against the evil, to stand against the evil, to actively oppose the evil. And Bonhoeffer saw this very clearly in the early 30s, before anyone else did. If you've read my Bonhoeffer book, and I recommend it, not because I wrote it, but because it is a story of what's happening in America today. When he saw these things, he very quickly saw where it was going. He understood that the philosophy of the Nazis was totalitarian, right? In other words, the state is God. The state is God. The state cannot have any competition. And if you stand up for God, you will be crushed. If you go to China today, if you go all around the world, totalitarian societies that say the state is God, they have no problem with you until you actually live out your faith. If you just want to do some weird little ritual in a building on Sunday morning, they don't mind. Let me cut to the chase. The devil doesn't mind. If that's your church, you just go into a building and you do some stuff. It's when you live that faith out of that building every day of the week, in every sphere, that's when Satan has a problem with your faith. And if Satan doesn't have a problem with your faith, you have no faith. So Bonhoeffer saw that the German Christians, many of them, they had taken in Luther's ideas to an extent that it warped them. It's like, you could take something that's true and you go a little too far with it, right? So Luther's all about, it's about faith. You're saved by faith. You're saved by faith. You're saved by faith. And everybody says, okay, yes, I'm saved by faith. But the scripture says faith without works is dead. That's in the book of James. Luther didn't love the book of James. Tough luck for him. It's part of the Word of God. So there's this conundrum, this paradox, that of course you're saved by faith. And you can't earn your way to heaven. But if your faith is genuine, if you believe Jesus defeated death on the cross, if you believe all that stuff, you will inevitably live differently. You will live courageously if you actually believe that. And if you sort of believe it, you will not live courageously. And Bonhoeffer looked at the German church and he saw satanic evil rising, and many in the church somehow thought, we can be in the middle, we don't have to choose. We don't have to choose. Now, I have to say that when Hitler took office in 1933, many German pastors did quickly see that there's trouble. Because what he wanted to do, and this is, again, always the case with, big state, big government, right? They want to be God. And Hitler, because they don't have separation of church and state, they don't have freedom of religion in Germany, they don't have the tradition that we have, so we have no excuse. But they had this idea that the church and the state were somehow together, because the Kaiser was always very pro-church. So now Hitler is the head of state, and he decides he wants to remake the German church in his image, along Nazi lines. And so you could see a lot of people being a little uncomfortable with that, but a number of people were suddenly very uncomfortable with that. They said, wait a minute, no, you can't do that. And so they wrote something called the Barmen Declaration, and I think 5,000 or 6,000 of these 18,000 pastors signed it. But the pressure that came, very similar to what we're living through today, the cancel culture. If you do the wrong thing, if you don't say the right thing, whatever, you could lose your job, you could be investigated, the FBI, the Gestapo might knock on your door. If there are any FBI people, I hate you. How horrifying that we all know what I'm talking about. How horrifying in America today, if you want to know where things are in America today. But the point is, they were threatened. You might lose your job. You better do this. You better do that, whatever. So by 1935, only 3,000, as I said, were standing strong and saying, the church bows only to Jesus our Lord. The church will not bow to the state, will not bow to the Führer. The church stands alone. Only 3,000 at the time understood that. So you had 12,000 pastors that somehow said, we don't want to take a stand here. We don't want to offend anybody. We don't want to be political. We just want to preach the gospel. And they effectively said, we'll sit on the fence. We're gonna be on the fence. This is a safe place for us. We're going to see which way the wind blows. What they didn't know, of course, and what many pastors in America today don't know, is if you're sitting on the fence, the devil owns the fence. And he doesn't want you to know that. He wants you to think you're being neutral. Oh, you're being neutral. You get this a lot where people say, oh, well, we preach the Bible in our church. We preach the Bible in our church. Well, the problem is, if you actually preach the Bible, you're going to be discipling your congregation, and you're going to be telling them what is right and what is wrong. You can't preach the gospel. You can't preach the Bible without dealing with some thorny moral issues. There's no way around it. And killing the unborn, you're going to be in the uncomfortable position of being really political when you preach the Bible, if you really are preaching the Bible. But a lot of people are preaching the Bible, except not anything that might sound political. And if that's the case, then you're not actually preaching the Bible. God expects us to speak the truth. The issue of slavery in this country, just imagine that there were pastors in 1850 that said, you know what? That's a hot button issue. That's a political issue. We just want to preach the gospel. We're not going to take a position on slavery. God is a judge. And if you don't take a position on a moral issue like that, God knows how shallow your faith really is. He knows that you're picking and choosing what you believe. Well, Bonhoeffer was facing that in Germany, and he knew that there was a small window of opportunity. I always have the image of Gulliver being tied down by the Lilliputians. This idea that if you're asleep, right, like Gulliver was asleep, and the Lilliputians are tying him down with, I don't know, dental floss or twine or something like that, but he's asleep. And if at any moment he wakes up, he can crush them. He's a giant compared to them, right? That's the sleeping church. Bonhoeffer knew that it was Hitler's goal to keep the church asleep, to keep those 12,000 pastors in the middle from acting, to just keep them asleep, throw them a little language here and there, pro-God language, but don't wake them up. Of course, if you're evil, you're not going to say what your plans are. You're not going to say, oh, and by the way, we're going to murder millions of human beings once we get the power. And neither will some of the leaders today vying for your vote. They're not going to tell you what they would actually do if you give them the power. They're not going to say that. So a lot of Germans very naively believed that everything's going to be fine. The pendulum swings both ways. Hitler's a one-term Führer. We'll be fine. And so they did nothing. And Bonhoeffer knew that the window of opportunity was very small, that if they didn't speak up, they had almost less than 2 years from when Hitler took power. And most of them, as I said, didn't do anything. And so it's the classic case of if the church is asleep like that, if they can just keep the church asleep just a little longer, that image of Gulliver, the Lilliputians tying him down. If he wakes up in time, he can rip up the stakes. But if he keeps sleeping a little longer, at some point, he wakes up and he can't move, it's over. And that is exactly what big government wants to do. That's what the Nazis wanted to do. They wanted to keep the German population, the church in particular, sleeping a few more minutes because another law, another regulation, another law, another regulation, another person put in a concentration camp, another person put in a concentration camp. At some point, it's over. And now when you realize what's happened, there's nothing you can do. And that, unfortunately, my brothers and sisters, is exactly where we are in America. We have the tiniest window of opportunity, but there are many, many pastors and Christian leaders who are advocating, quote unquote, not being political. And I'm here to tell you that it's never about politics. Politics is a tool. And by the way, politics, in the case of the United States of America, is a glorious gift from God, where we can bring God's will into our culture. We can bring God's laws into our culture. What happened with Roe v. Wade, how many people here heard? I heard this over and over and over again. I certainly heard it in 2016. Roe v. Wade will, Eric, trust me, Roe v. Wade will never be overturned. Do not vote for Donald Trump in 2016. Trust me, he will never, first of all, he will never do anything. And by the way, it can never be overturned. You just need to deal with that. There's nothing you can do. Did you ever hear that? By the way, I'm just curious, was it ever overturned? Oh, really? Really? Hard to believe, because so many people were so sure that it would never be overturned. And it reminds me of the Iron Curtain. I don't know if you grew up in this country, if you're as old as I am, the idea that the Soviet Union might ever evaporate, that would never happen. The Iron Curtain, never. When it happened, most people like me, you couldn't believe it. You simply couldn't believe it. It had lasted for 70 years. God is the God who parted the Red Sea. God is a God of history. God can do things. And there are many people who have this fatalistic idea. Many Christians have this fatalistic idea that it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what you do. By the way, we're already under judgment. There's nothing you can do. It's over. Folks, that's the voice of the devil. It is our job to fight and pray and fight and pray and fight and pray, and the Lord will decide what happens when it happens. Most of us know that, like what was happening in Germany in the early 30s, this is God's mercy, I think, to us. We've seen real evil in our time, stuff that we never dreamt we would see in the United States of America. Where should I begin? What madness should I refer to that most of us 5 or 10 years ago thought we would never in a million years see in America? Did you ever think you'd hear anybody say, we need to defund the police? Do you remember the first time I heard that, I thought, that's a joke, right? Like, that's a joke, right? Who's going to suffer if you defund the police? Poor people are going to suffer. People in bad neighborhoods are going to suffer. That's madness. Well, Marxist lunacy has come to America, and these ideas are being pushed. Did you ever dream that you would live in a world where people are trying to tell you a man can become a woman? Did you ever dream that anyone would actually say that would become a thing? Did you ever dream that anybody would say that women can become men? All you need to do is take a blood test. It's like you're either a dude or you're not. Like, it's one or the other, that's it. You're a rooster, you're a hen. There's like no fourth, fifth, sixth option. And you know what? If you don't believe that, if you're any kind of a Christian, you read the Bible says we're made in God's image, male and female. That's it. But 5 minutes ago, some maniacs decided, like, oh no, there's a smorgasbord of options, there's a continuum, and if you disagree with that, you're a monster and a bigot, and you need to be canceled and silenced for what everyone has believed since the beginning of time. Did you ever think you'd see that in America? Now, as bad as that is, that's nothing compared to the idea that these ideas have reached into public schools that are funded by you, funded by we the people, and your children are being propagandized with this madness, and it's worse than mere madness. It's child abuse to bring these things up to kids. And worse than that, many of them are being persuaded that they're confused about who they are and they need to do something about it. This is happening in America. And in some states, they will take your children away from you if you don't go along with this evil madness. That's where we are in America. And I would say the reason we're there is because the church has largely been silent. The church has largely said, we don't want to be political. We've got people on both sides in our congregation. We don't want to take a stand on that. It would be divisive to take a stand on that. Well, you know what's divisive? Saying that Jesus rose bodily from the dead. That's crazy talk, but I believe it. If you're a Christian, you believe that. There are a lot of things that we believe. It's simply a matter of what is true. But here we're talking about fundamentals that they come right out of Scripture that are being denied, and our tax dollars are being used to take children away from their parents effectively, intellectually, and in some cases, genuinely, literally take them away from their parents. Whoever dreamt we'd see that kind of evil? Whoever dreamt you'd have people advocating for no border? Did you ever dream you'd see anything like that? That the sovereignty of America would be called into question? That if you believed in the sovereignty of America, you would be called a racist or a xenophobe or whatever word they're using to get you to shut up? This is madness that has arisen in our time. It is evil that has arisen in our time. And it's the job of the church to speak most boldly against it, because we have no excuse for not speaking. When you're told that there's a smorgasbord of genders, you know that's not true. You're not persuaded. There are people that are confused because the experts are saying things. We ought to know better, and we ought to speak boldly on behalf of those who are confused, because they're wondering, I don't know what to tell my kids. I'm confused. So Bonhoeffer saw evil rising in Germany, and he knew that if the church didn't unite and speak, now the church had the power, this is the key, the church had the cultural power in Germany, and they knew it, that if they were to stand against the Nazis early on, they could have withstood the evil. They could have stood against the evil, genuinely. That's not theory. But not enough stood. Similarly, in America, the church in America is a sleeping giant. Unfortunately, a sleeping giant. And the fact of the matter is that if every Christian voted, if every Christian was vocal, if every Christian stood firmly, you'd be in a different America right now. But many Christians have been falsely persuaded, just as the... Many people seem to think that, there's like an 11th commandment that we're not supposed to be political. And I just find it extraordinary that this is precisely what Bonhoeffer was dealing with. He was trying to get the church to be political, not because he wanted them to be political, but he understood that God had given them a voice. But we see what happened in Germany. By 1935, it was over. It was over think about this, by 1935, it was over. So if you woke up in 36 or 37, it really didn't matter. There was nothing you could do now. It was over. There's a story I tell in the sequel to Letter to the American Church. It's called, the book is called Religionless Christianity, about Pastor Martin Niemöller. Some of you know of him. He's the one that wrote the famous poem, first they came for the socialists and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the communists and I did not speak out for, that pastor originally was one of the good guys who was fooled by Hitler, just as many good pastors have been fooled and have been silent and were quiet when they were told to shut down their churches, when they were told whatever. They just thought, I just want to be good with this. I'm just going to go along. I'm going to go along. I'm going to go along. And then at some point, they wake up and they go, I don't know. Maybe I made a mistake. Martin Niemöller is the poster child for this because he was a good man, a patriotic German. He never dreamt that the Nazis, if they got power, would use it for satanic evil. And I don't need to remind you that they used it for satanic evil. They didn't they took what they believed, which is fundamentally atheistic. It might not be officially Marxist, but it might as well be. It is godless philosophy, which says that human beings are worth nothing, and we can do what we like with human beings. They took that philosophy, and the death camps and what came out of it is so evil that it's very hard for us even today to comprehend what they did. Bonhoeffer tried to wake the church up in time, and it wasn't in time. But Martin Niemöller was one of the good pastors who really believed in Hitler's promises. Hitler promised him in person that I will not bother the church. I will not. There will be no pogroms against Jews. He told Martin Niemöller in person. in 1932. So he gets elected in 33. Martin Niemöller, of course, immediately sees what a lot of other pastors see, that the Nazis with lightning speed were taking over the church, silencing the church. And I'm here to tell you, if the left gets control of the White House in this next season, it is over for the church in America. I want to be real clear, that's what you're facing. You think you've seen cancel culture, you think you've seen, FBI's knocking on your doors and threatening pro-life people. You think you've seen something. You have seen nothing if we don't stand. So Niemöller sees this going on, and he thinks, what's going on? What's happening? I had Hitler's personal assurances. So he goes to get a meeting with Hitler, and it takes literally almost a year to finally get the meeting, because he really believed naively that it's not Hitler, it's the people around him. I've talked to Hitler, he's reasonable, he doesn't want to bother the church. He finally gets a meeting with Hitler. In that meeting, I describe it in the new book, Religionless Christianity. In that meeting, Hitler reveals who he really is and effectively threatens Martin Niemöller, a completely different person, threatens him and makes him understand, you are nothing. You are nothing. I used you to get elected, and now if you're out of line, I'll put you in a concentration camp. And in that meeting, there's a line that Hitler spoke, which is almost like it'd be out of a script, except it's true. It's exactly what he said. Martin Niemöller's kind of defending himself and saying, like, mein Führer, I didn't mean anything by that comment or that comment. I mean, I'm pro-German. I care about the Third Reich. And this is when Hitler cuts him off and says, I built the Third Reich. You just worry about your sermons. In other words, Hitler's contempt for the church, for pastors, was infinite. And in his idea, your sermons, it means your little nothing sermons, your little sermons that have no bearing on anything outside of that building where you do your little medieval rituals. And that is the devil's church, a church that says, we're just going to do what we do on Sunday morning, we're going to sing our hymns, we've got our theology, but it's all private. Once we leave here, you can have that. You have that kind of church in China. They have official churches in China, right? They say, yeah, go in that building, do that thing. You have our official government permission to practice your weird little religion in that building on a Sunday morning. But when you leave that building, you will bow to the secular authority of the state. Anyone who takes that bargain is not a Christian. That is the devil's church, and that's the church that Hitler wanted in Germany, a church that he could control, a church that would be meek, would be submissive, that would not dare to say anything against the policies of the Third Reich. But Bonhoeffer knew, and we should know, that the church is the conscience of the state. It is our duty before God to speak God's truth, come what may, in every area where we can speak it. We're not supposed to stay in our theological lane. We're not supposed to just preach the gospel. No. And by the way, what dead gospel are you preaching if you cannot take a stand on the moral issues that are facing us today? There are many people that are just convinced that it doesn't matter. So you have some people that think they actually believe that we're not supposed to take a stand on these issues, that we're supposed to be quiet on these issues. Just as many pastors felt we're supposed to be quiet on the slavery issue, right? Now, just imagine what God thinks of that. But we have it going on today. But then there are others who maybe they have a view of these things, but they are, as I said earlier, they're fatalists. They say there's nothing you can do. We're under judgment. Don't do anything. And I want to be clear that we're in the third existential crisis of our history. The first was the revolution. The second was the Civil War. We are now in the third existential crisis of our history. If we do not prevail, if we the people do not prevail, it's over for America, just as it would have been over if George Washington had lost to the British. And when you think about it, you say, well, what would have been the downside if George Washington lost to the British? No America. What would have been the downside if we lost the Union in the Civil War? This country would have been shattered. There would have been no America, the America we know. We are facing that right now. But there are many people, maybe because they have certain eschatology, they're convinced it doesn't matter, it's over. I'm here to tell you it's not over. I'm here to tell you it's the Lord's will that the church arise and fight and speak and pray. And just as I said, when people fatalistically said Roe v. Wade will never be overturned, don't vote in 2016. Don't vote for that dirty guy. Don't vote. Keep your hands clean. People said that with Reagan. You understand. People said to Reagan, you cannot say, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. The Soviet Union will always exist. There's nothing you can do. We need détente. We need to play patty cake with the devil here. We're not going to do anything about it. And Reagan said, no, that's the evil empire. That is, if we can fight and pray, and if the Soviet Union come down, God will be glorified. And so Reagan said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. He dared to say it. When he said it, the demons shuddered. And I think you and I know that that wall came down. We need to have that faith. I'll end with this. If you asked George Washington in 1776, if you had asked George Washington in 1776, George, how's it going? He would have said, if you know your history, it's going very, very poorly. Very poorly. We never, never, never should have prevailed against the mightiest force in the world, the British Empire. But he didn't say, well, you know, it doesn't look so good, so we're going to bow out. He would have said, because you can see by his actions, he would have said, it looks very, very bad, but if Providence, capital P, the Lord, be with us in this cause of liberty, we will fight on, and we will fight on, and we will fight on. And they fought on and fought on and fought on, and guess what happened? I think you know what happened. But do you know how many people then said it will never happen? You're a fool, you'll lose your life. We need to be that kind of fool right now. As the world, as America goes, folks, just in case you don't feel the pressure, as America goes, so goes the world. As America goes, so goes the world. If we lose this election, if we lose this nation, the whole world suffers. And you're commanded by the Lord to love your neighbors. And your neighbors all across the world are looking at this country. So as America goes, so goes the world. As the American church goes, so goes America. You, my brothers and sisters, are the American church. If you're going to a church that's looking the other way as evils arise, I would strongly counsel you to get out of that church for the sake of your soul. God is looking for his church to live boldly, to speak on every single issue. Never believe the lie that you should be silent, that you should just stick to your theology. God has called the American church to this hour. You, American church, seize this opportunity. It is a privilege that we get to do God's will at this time. God bless you.
Thank you.